The galaxy remembered human defiance long before it remembered human names. But for centuries the Council insisted the memory was a myth, a legend invented by frightened species who needed explanations for the scars carved across their borders. Yet as the alarm screamed across the Council war chamber and holographic star charts warped under incoming distress signals, every elder finally understood the truth they had buried, because the one thing they feared was no longer rumor. It was here, inside their sanctum, and it wore a human face. Admiral Cathorian's scales twitched with anxiety as he stared at the lone figure escorted down the obsidian walkway, a young human woman with a stance too calm for someone surrounded by armed guards, her boots echoing like war drums across the polished stone, her eyes steady, sharp, unsettling, and when she lifted her chin toward the towering council dais, the chamber lights dimmed as if the room itself sensed it should brace for impact. "Identify yourself," one of the Grand Counselors demanded, his crystalline body vibrating with authority. But the woman only tilted her head and let a faint smile stretch across her lips, a smile that made every nervous species in the room recoil, because it resembled the old stories, the ones whispered in trenches and bunkers when soldiers spoke of humans who stood while their planets burned and still refused to kneel. "My name is Aria Hale," she said, voice steady, quiet, and somehow sharper than any blade. "And I'm here because you asked for Earth's surrender." The chamber erupted into outrage, hisses, mechanical curses, metallic stomps. Yet Aria didn't flinch, didn't lower her gaze, didn't show a flicker of fear as she stood before 6 galactic superpowers whose fleets could eclipse suns. "Earth is not recognized as a sovereign world," another counselor snapped, translucent fins flaring. "Your species lost that right after the rebellion wars." But Aria simply responded, "We didn't lose anything. You just stopped looking long enough to pretend you won." A hologram flickered to life beside her. The scorched ruins of New Geneva, smoke curling from collapsed towers, ash drifting over silent streets, bodies covered in emergency tarps. And for the first time in centuries, the counselors saw what their blockade had done, how their iron laws and force sanctions had left Earth gasping. But Aria stepped to the hologram, letting the ashes swirl around her boots as though she walked through in reality, and said, "You thought you broke us. But humans don't break. We adapt." The air thickened with tension as she reached into her coat slowly, deliberately, causing every safety protocol in the chamber to escalate to lethal readiness. But she produced only a single small cube and activated it, releasing a shimmering blue projection of a battle. Alien Draction warfighters falling to human guerrilla squads, kinetic rifles punching through energy shields, humans fighting with desperate, brutal precision, each movement shaped by centuries of surviving extinction level. "Threats. Impossible," whispered Counselor Run, trembling. "The Draction swarm overran your colonies decades ago." Aria answered, "They did, and we survived anyway. Humans always survive." The chamber lights flickered again, this time not from atmospheric systems, but from something far larger, something outside. A low hum vibrated through the walls, rhythmic, powerful, controlled. The counselors turned as external cameras displayed a shape emerging from FTL distortion beyond the station, a vessel no species recognized, angular, dark, armor with plates that shimmered like forged meteor skin, surrounded by blue ion halos. Its silhouette was unmistakably human. "What is that?" someone whispered, voice cracking. Aria watched them with that same unsettling calm and said, "That is the first ship of our return." Panic rippled across the council dais as readouts scrolled with impossible metrics. Human technology operating at levels no species believed Earth was capable of, weapons arrays charging, tactical signatures rewriting themselves in real time. "You dare threaten this council?" a massive warlord roared, rise in full height. But Aria met his fury with steady defiance. "No," she said, "I'm warning you." Her expression hardened, losing the faint trace of humor it carried before. "Your laws starved our worlds. Your blockades killed our families. You call us unstable, dangerous, Primitive. You tried to erase us. But we don't vanish. We endure. Another tremor shook the chamber as more ships decloaked. Sleek, unmarked human, but not bearing any nation's flag. Something more unified, more deliberate. We are done asking for recognition, Aria said, stepping forward as every security turret swiveled toward her, and we will never bow again. Before the council could formulate a response, a blinding surge of energy flared in the void just beyond the human ships, space itself warping, trembling, splitting open with a violent howl, and every species screamed in fear, because the signature wasn't human. It was something older, something predatory, something that should not exist, and it was coming straight for the council station. The floor shook, alarms wailed, and Aria looked up slowly, her expression shifting. Not to fear, but to grim recognition. They followed me, she whispered. Damn it! They weren't supposed to find us this fast. The chamber plunged into darkness. The emergency light snapped back on in a violent stutter, bathing the council chamber in blood-red pulses that made every species' skin crawl as a vibration from the anomaly outside deepened into a low, predatory rumble, and the station groaned under an unseen gravitational pressure so intense that even the reinforced alloy beams began to warp, prompting counselors to scramble from their seats in blind panic. But Aria Hale remained exactly where she stood, frozen in the center of the chaos, with her eyes narrowed toward the ceiling as if she alone understood the threat tearing its way into their reality. And when a deafening crack split the chamber's superstructure overhead, revealing a spiderweb of fractures crawling across the reinforced viewport, the council guards aimed weapons at her again. Hysterically convinced a human was the source of catastrophe, but Aria ignored them and muttered under her breath, "If they already found me, then the timeline's worse than I thought." Before turning sharply toward the dais, where the most powerful political beings in the galaxy huddled behind their guards like frightened children, their fear stank in the air, thick and metallic, as the holoscreens flashed a terrifying image of the rift widening beyond the human fleet, a swirling vortex of obsidian matter pushing into real space with claw-like tendrils that sparked with unnatural lightning. And the council's readings scrambled with incoherent data, as if their instruments refused to acknowledge the existence of what they were detecting. With a sudden convulsion of space-time, a colossal shape pushed through the distortion, its silhouette jagged and asymmetrical, its hull seemingly grown rather than built, pulsating with the eerie glow of internal bioreactors, and every species in the chamber recognized it not from memory, but from instinct, a primal dread buried deep in their evolutionary code. The Eclipse Dominion had arrived, an enemy so ancient and violent it was believed extinct, a genocidal civilization that once consumed entire sectors before vanishing into deep space thousands of years earlier, and now they were here, staring directly at the Council's most secure citadel, not by coincidence, but hunting one singular human. Before panic could collapse into full-blown hysteria, the chamber shook again as a Dominion ship fired a tether beam, a spiraling helix of black glowing particles that latched onto the station like a parasite sinking its fangs into prey, and the corridors trembled with the vibration of boarding conduits forming. Creatures began to emerge, tall, skeletal entities draped in armor grown from living metal, their elongated limbs tipped with razor hooks dripping with cold vapor that hissed upon contact with the chamber's floor, and the council guards opened fire, but their energy bolts bent around the creature's armor or evaporated entirely before impact, as though reality itself refused to cooperate with their weapons. Aria reacted instantly, diving forward and slamming her hand against the encrypted command console embedded in the floor, overriding security locks with a code no human should have known, triggering magnetic dampeners that rippled through the chamber and distorted all shielding frequencies, causing Dominion armor to flicker long enough for guard fire to land real hits, though not enough to kill them, only to stagger them back in snarling, shrieking fury. The counselors gaped at her in disbelief. But Aria didn't wait for their questions, instead grabbing a fallen guard's kinetic sidearm and yelling "Move," as she fired round after round at the creatures pushing through the breach. The chamber erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts ripping through the air, Dominion shrieks echoing to the vaulted ceiling. But amid the carnage, Aria made her way to the emergency evacuation lift only to stop abruptly when she saw an enormous projection flicker to life behind her, a Dominion overseer's face, if it could be called a face, appearing in the air, its many fractured eyes focusing solely on her as its voice slithered into every mind in the chamber, without sound, whispering, "Found you." And Aria's breath caught, her eyes filled with a pain she hid beneath anger, because she knew exactly who this overseer was and why it hunted her. The counselors recoiled as the telepathic pressure increased, squeezing their thoughts, blotting out their senses, forcing them to kneel under the weight of the overseer's presence. But the pressure washed over Aria differently, not with domination but with familiarity, like a nightmare she had survived once and now had to face again. "You don't get to touch them," she growled and fired directly at the projection's energy node, disrupting the telepathic resonance and sending a shock wave that shattered half the chamber's glass panels. The overseer vanished in a ripple of static, but its voice lingered like venom in the air, whispering, "You cannot hide from your origin, child of the void." The counselor stared at her, stunned, terrified, suspicious, because the words implied something impossible, something forbidden. But Aria didn't give them time to process it as she sprinted toward the lift and stabbed the manual override, forcing it open. "You're coming with me if you want to survive," she shouted. But only a few counselors stumbled forward while the rest stayed paralyzed by fear or denial, screaming for security reinforcements that would never arrive. Before she could usher the survivors in, the station jolted violently as another Dominion ship emerged from the rift, then another, and then a dozen more, encircling the station like vultures, and Aria felt her heart pound against her ribs. Not from fear for herself, but from the realization that the Dominion wasn't here merely to destroy the Council. They were here to erase the truth she carried, the truth of Earth's disappearance, the truth that had been buried even from humans themselves. As the lift doors closed and the surviving counselors inside trembled uncontrollably, one finally managed to speak, voice cracking, "What are you? What do they mean, your origin?" Aria didn't look at them, her jaw clenched, her expression carved from steel. "I'm human," she said quietly. "That's all you need to know." But her voice wavered ever so slightly, betraying that even she didn't fully believe her own answer anymore. The lift plummeted toward the station's lower sectors, alarms blaring all around them, Dominion boarding shrieks echoing through ventilation shafts, and as the lights flickered one more time, Aria whispered a phrase that sent chills through every alien beside her. "If they're here already, then Earth never stood a chance." The lift roared downward like a falling coffin, metal groaning as Dominion shockwaves rattled every bolt in the walls, and Aria braced herself against the trembling rail, while the surviving counselors clung to whatever they could, their once proud faces pale reflections of beings who had ruled galaxies yet now looked like frightened civilians trapped between annihilation and something even worse, the unknown truth tied to humans standing among them. The lift display flickered violently between floors as if the station's core systems were trying to warn them of something crawling to the lower decks, and when a piercing screech shuddered through the shaft, one of the counselors, a tall, crystalline seraphite, whispered in terror, "They're burrowing through the walls." But Aria didn't respond because she already knew the Dominion's methods. They never relied on a single breach point. They spread like rot, infiltrating every weak seam until the structure itself surrendered. When the lift finally slammed to a halt, the impact threw everyone forward, sparks raining from the ceiling as the doors hissed open onto a corridor filled with smoke, ruptured wiring, and flickering red strips that barely illuminated the destruction. And Aria was first out, weapon raised, scanning every shadow while the counselor stumbled out behind her in trembling disarray. Something wet dripped onto her shoulder, and she glanced up to see a Dominion crawler sprawled across the ceiling, its segmented body twitching, its obsidian carapace cracked open by laser burns. Someone had already fought here, but as she moved past it, its remaining eye socket pulsed faintly and a tendril lashed out. Aria ducked under it and drove her kinetic knife upward into the creature's throat joint, killing it fully this time, the blade humming as it pierced corrupted tissue. The counselors recoiled at the brutality but followed her, staying close as she advanced through the corridor, stepping over fallen guards and shattered armor plates, and every so often she felt the Dominion's psychic pressure probing her mind like cold fingers tracing old scars, and she shoved the sensation away, refusing to let them inside again. She had learned long ago that Dominion telepathy wasn't just communication, it was violation. As they turned a corner, the emergency shutters ahead buckled inward with a force that sent a gust of frigid air through the hall, extinguishing the fires and plunging them into deeper shadow. And then a metallic arm slammed to the shutter, prying it open like foil, revealing a Dominion foot soldier nearly twice Aria's size, its armor of living obsidian shifting like liquid stone. And the counselor screamed as it lunged forward with a blade that hummed with quantum decay, capable of dissolving flesh on contact. Aria didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest counselor, yanked him back, rolled beneath the soldier's strike, and fired point-blank into the creature's knee joint, shattering its limb, but it didn't fall. It pivoted unnaturally and swung an arm toward her throat, forcing her to block with her forearm, the impact jarring through her bones, and she used the force of the blow to twist behind the creature, plant a magnetic charge at the base of its neck, and shove it forward before the charge detonated, blowing its upper spinal column apart in a burst of shrapnel and black fluid. Before she could catch her breath, a soft chime echoed from deeper in the corridor, a chime she recognized instantly, and her expression hardened because that sound wasn't Dominion. It was human tech, old tech, lost tech. She moved forward cautiously, the counselors whispering behind her, asking what that sound meant. But Aria ignored them, focusing on the rhythmic pulses guiding her toward a sealed blast door half buried under wreckage. She dug through the debris, hands shaking not from exertion but from dread as she uncovered a small embedded device glowing with a faint blue ring, the same signature used by Earth's deep archive beacons, the kind installed only in classified human structures. Her throat tightened because she had seen this exact beacon once before, in the ruins of the colony where she had grown up, the one erased from every official record, and she suddenly understood why the Dominion had come here. They weren't tracking her through hyperspace or scanning human fleet signatures. They were following the beacon's reactivation, something she had unknowingly triggered when she accessed the Council's encrypted systems earlier. The blast door hissed and cracked as Dominion claws scraped from the other side, trying to force their way in. But Aria pressed her palm against the beacon and entered a code buried so deep in her memory that she wasn't sure she had ever consciously learned it. The beacon flashed white. The blast door slid open and a rush of cold, sterile air spilled out, revealing a chamber untouched by the chaos outside, illuminated by soft blue lights that felt eerily familiar, and Aria froze in place because she had walked into this room before, or one exactly like it, many years ago, before the colony fell, before everything changed. The counselors entered hesitantly, their eyes darting around the chamber, taking in the strange architecture that didn't match any known species, not even human, and one of them asked nervously, "What is this place?" Aria swallowed hard. "It's impossible," she whispered. These were destroyed, every one of them. Before she could explain further, a hologram flickered to life in the center of the room, a static-ridden projection of a human figure wearing ancient expedition armor, his face grainy and distorted, but his voice clear enough to freeze Aria's blood. "If you're seeing this, they found us. They breached the vault." The counselors gasped while Aria stepped closer in numb disbelief, watching the man struggle to remain standing as explosions echoed behind him in the recording. "The Dominion never wanted Earth," he continued. "They wanted what Earth was hiding, what we were hiding, the truth about her origin. Aria shook her head violently, backing away as if trying to physically reject the words. But the hologram flickered again, and the man turned directly toward her, his expression shifting into one of desperate urgency. Aria, if you're alive, you must run. You must never let them capture you. You're the last one who can... The recording cut off in a burst of static. The chamber went silent, except for the counselor's panicked breathing and the distant thuds of Dominion soldiers closing in from both ends of the corridor. Aria stood trembling, her weapon lowered, her world tilting as old memories surged. Memories of her colony burning, of Dominion silhouettes walking through fire, of her own screams echoing through evacuation tunnels, and a voice telling her, "You must survive. You're the key." She had spent her entire life believing she was just another survivor, one of the few humans who escaped the fall of her colony, but now the truth clawed at her mind. Someone had built vaults like this in multiple locations, hidden them from humans and aliens alike, and whatever was inside them, whatever she was tied to, was important enough for the Dominion to hunt her across the galaxy. Before she could gather her thoughts, the facility lights snapped to red as an automated voice announced containment breach detected, and the blast doors behind them exploded inward as Dominion soldiers flooded the corridor. At the same time, the opposite door slammed open, revealing a squad of armored humans in matte black exosuits with Earth sigils Aria had never seen before. Two factions, Dominion and Human, charged toward her at once. And at the exact center of their convergence stood Aria, the one person both sides were trying to claim. The room filled with blinding light and deafening gunfire. The world detonated around Aria in a storm of muzzle flashes, quantum blades, and screaming metal as the Dominion surged into the chamber with inhuman precision, while the black armor human squad opened fire in silent, disciplined bursts, their formation tight, their movements eerie in their familiarity, and Aria felt pulled in two directions at once, toward the species she was born from and the monsters who had shaped her nightmares. Yet she didn't belong fully to either, as the energy bolts streaked past her face, scorching the air and filling her lungs with a metallic scent of superheated ions. The first Dominion soldier to reach her swung its blade in a wide, decapitating arc, but Aria ducked low, grabbed the creature's wrist joint, twisted until bone and armor cracked, then ripped its own weapon free and drove it to the gap in its jaw, its body spasming violently before collapsing at her feet, and she barely had a second to breathe before one of the black armor humans shouted her name. Her real name, not the alias she'd been using, but the one she hadn't heard since the colony. Fell, and that shock paralyzed her long enough for a Dominion blast to slam into her shoulder, spinning her into the wall with force that left her ears ringing and her vision swimming with silver motes. A human soldier grabbed her by the collar before she could fall, his visor reflecting her shocked face, and he said, "Extraction protocol is active. Stay behind us." But she shoved him away instinctively, confused and furious because no one should have known her name or her existence, not outside the colony, not after the archives burned. The Dominion pressed forward relentlessly, their bodies reshaping and twisting as they switched combat morphs, blades dissolving into energy tendrils and armor liquefying into spiked protrusions meant to tear through exosuits, and the counselors huddled behind a shattered workstation, screaming prayers to a dozen alien gods as debris rained around them. But Aria leapt over the console, slammed into a crawler mid-pounce, and drove her knee into its throat until the exoskeleton cracked, ignoring the stabbing pain in her injured shoulder as adrenaline burned through her veins. The human squad split into flanking groups, their leader barking unfamiliar Earth code commands that Aria hadn't heard in her military years, command from black-level divisions she had believed were nothing more than myths told in orphanage barracks, the kind whispered about after lights out, ghost units, off-record operatives, the kind who answer to no government or council, but to something older, something buried. When the Dominion's next wave poured into the ceiling vents like a cascade of living darkness, Aria grabbed the counselors by their collars and dragged them toward a half-collapsed maintenance tunnel at the far end of the chamber, yelling at them to crawl even as Dominion talons slashed inches from her back, and she fired blindly over her shoulder, each shot lighting the tunnel with blue pulses as she forced them deeper into confined darkness. Behind them, the human squad fought with brutal efficiency, but Aria sensed something off. Not desperation or panic, but purpose, like they weren't here to save her or the Council, but to extract something specific, and that terrified her more than the Dominion, because she wasn't sure which side's intentions were worse. When the tunnel forked, she chose the left path without hesitation, following a faint vibration in the floor, an old instinct she didn't want to question, until they reached a circular service chamber lit by a single flickering diagnostic strip, the air smelling of ionized coolant and scorched wiring. And as she sealed the hatch behind them, she felt the metal tremble under Dominion impacts. One of the counselors, trembling so hard he could barely speak, finally whispered, "Why are they calling you by a name we've never seen in any human registry?" And Aria closed her eyes, her chest tightening as memories clawed up again, evacuation tunnels collapsing, her father shoving her into a cryopod she wasn't meant to fit into, Dominion creatures tearing through steel like cloth, and she forced herself to breathe before saying, "Because the records were erased. Because someone made sure there was nothing left of us." Another counselor, voice cracking, asked, "Us? You mean your colony?" And Aria hesitated, the truth trembling on her tongue, because colony was too simple, too sanitized for what the Vol hologram suggested, for what she had suspected since childhood but never dared voice. Humans weren't just colonists. They had been covering something up. Before she could answer, the hatch behind them dented inward with a concussive boom, Dominion claws ripping through layer by layer, and Aria spun toward the opposite exit, only to stop dead when motion sensors lit the corridor ahead and revealed another figure, a human, alone, unarmored, wearing expedition clothing nearly identical to the hologram from the vault. And the moment he stepped fully into the light, the counselors gasped because his face was unmistakable. The same man from the recording, older but alive, eyes hollowed by years of running from something larger than himself. "Aria," he whispered, voice shaking not from fear but from overwhelming relief. "I finally found you." Aria's pulse spiked, her fingers tightening on her weapon as her voice cracked out. "That's impossible. You died. I saw the reports. I saw the colony burn." "They didn't destroy us," he interrupted, stepping closer even as Dominion soldiers shredded the final layer of the hatch behind her. "They scattered us. They hunted us. Because of what we carry. Because of what you are." The chamber lights flickered violently, Dominion roars echoing to the metal as the hatch burst open behind her, and Aria found herself trapped between the monsters who had chased her across the stars and the man who claimed to have been searching for her for decades. And in that suspended heartbeat, the oldest terror in her chest returned, the fear that she was not entirely human and never had been. The Dominion lunged. The man reached for her. Aria did not remember deciding to move, only the sudden explosion of instinct as the Dominion warriors launched themselves to the ruptured hatch in a frenzy of claws, tendrils, and shifting armor plates that glinted like liquid midnight, and she spun between their first strikes with a speed that felt borrowed from someone else's body, someone stronger, faster, older. The man who claimed to be her father dealt aside as she intercepted the nearest Dominion soldier midair, driving her elbow into its throat hard enough to warp its chitin. And the creature hit the ground, thrashing in a distorted tangle of limbs as she ripped its weapon free and hurled it like a spear into the next attacker, feeling a strange familiarity in her movements, as if every bone in her body remembered exactly how these things fought long before she consciously did. Behind her, the counselors screamed and scrambled into the far corner of the chamber, while the Dominion pack spread out in a crescent, blocking every escape route with their massive, shifting silhouettes that radiated a cold, unnatural hunger. And Aria aimed her weapon at the leader, a towering morph whose skull seemed to split into jagged ridges as it emitted a bone-deep resonance that vibrated through her ribs. A resonance she had felt once before as a child in the colony tunnels when the walls shook and everything went dark. Her father, or the man wearing her father's face, she still wasn't sure, shouted something, but she couldn't hear him over the blood pounding in her ears as the Dominion leader lunged, swinging an elongated arm that expanded into a spiraling blade, and Aria ducked, slid beneath its torso, and drove both boots into its back with enough force to send it crashing into the wall. The other Dominion soldiers surged forward, but the human black armor squad from earlier burst into the chamber at that exact moment, firing controlled bursts of particle rounds that tore molten holes through the Dominion carapaces, the blast lighting the chamber in strobe-like flashes that turned every movement into disjointed frames of violence. Aria stumbled back toward the center of the room, her injured shoulder burning, and the man who claimed to be her father reached her, grabbing her wrist with trembling hands as he said, "You need to listen now, before they take you. Aria, you are not what the Council believes. You never were." She tried to pull away, but something in his eyes, grief, exhaustion, hope, held her in place of the battle raged only feet away. Dominion screeches echoing in the chamber as human soldiers fought to hold the line. "They chased us across half the spiral arm because of one thing," he continued breathlessly. "Because of what your mother discovered, because of how she changed you." Aria felt ice spread along her spine, memories flickering like unstable holograms. Her mother's blurred voice, the hidden lab beneath the colony, the way Dominion soldiers tore through their homes searching for something, not someone, and she whispered, "What did she do to me?" His expression broke open with a sorrow that looked decades old as he said, "She unlocked the thing the Dominion feared most. The human genome as it was meant to be, unrestricted, evolving, not bound by the limits they engineered into early settlers. You are not enhanced. Aria, you are restored." She barely had time to process the words before the Dominion leader, impossibly fast despite its massive size, reformed itself from the crater wall and charged with a roar that shattered several overhead lights, plunging half the chamber into darkness. Aria shoved her father aside and braced herself as the creature's blade arms sliced toward her throat, but something inside her exploded awake, a reflex she did not understand, and she stepped into the attack rather than away from it, grabbing the blade's base with her bare hand, feeling its serrated energy bite into her skin without breaking bone, and using the creature's own momentum, she flipped it over her shoulder and slammed it onto its back so hard the floor cracked beneath them. The other Dominion soldiers recoiled, emitting guttural harmonics of uncertainty, and even the human black armor squad hesitated, as if reassessing everything they thought they knew about her. Her father stared at her with something like awe and terror mingled, whispering, "It's starting. She's becoming what your mother predicted." Aria staggered back, shaking, staring at her uncut hand as the Dominion blade's residual energy dissipated harmlessly from her skin. She wanted to scream, to deny all of it, but there was no time. More Dominion forces poured into the chamber from the upper passageway, their numbers overwhelming, and the human soldiers shouted for retreat. The commander of the black armored squad grabbed Aria's arm roughly, yelling, "We need extraction now." But her father stepped between them and said, "She's not going anywhere with you. Your organization caused this war in the first place." The commander aimed his weapon at the older man instantly, visor glowing red, and snarled, "We didn't cause anything. We tried to contain her mother's experiments. You people are the ones who let the Dominion learn the truth." Aria felt herself freeze between them as Dominion shrieks rose behind her, the pack closing again, and she suddenly understood that this was not a simple war, not an invasion, not a random targeting of a human colony. She, her family, her entire bloodline had been the strike point of a secret conflict no one had ever admitted existed. Dominion soldiers pounced into the chamber, forcing both human factions to fire wildly, and the chamber became chaos again, gunfire, screeches, collapsing metal plates, sparks raining from ruptured conduits, while Aria pushed forward, fighting on instinct, every movement guided by something deep and ancient in her DNA, until she reached the center console of the chamber, where an emergency override beacon still flickered. She slammed her hand onto the panel, activating a station-wide emergency shield pulse designed to clear biological threats, and a deep hum built in the walls as energy surged through the station's grid. Her father shouted something. The commander cursed through his visor. The counselors wailed, and the Dominion pack lunged toward her in a last coordinated attack. But the pulse erupted first. A wave of pure white light expanded outward in a violent sphere, shredding the Dominion creatures' bioforms at the molecular level, tearing them apart midair in clouds of disintegrating ash, and the shock wave threw Aria backward into far wall with bone-rattling force. When the light finally faded, the chamber was filled with smoke, dust, and the crumbling remains of Dominion bodies dissolving into floor vents. The human soldiers slowly stepped forward, weapons raised, assessing the aftermath. Aria pushed herself up on one elbow, coughing, vision swimming, and even as Commander approached her, she felt an overwhelming shift inside herself, like an engine awakening, like her blood was burning with something raw and limitless. Her father knelt beside her, brushing debris from her hair with trembling hands, whispering, "This is why they fear you. This is why they hunted us. You are proof that humanity was never meant to be controlled. Not by the Council, not by the Dominion, not by anyone." The commander stopped a meter away and pointed his weapon at Aria's chest, voice cold as ice as he said, "She's too dangerous. We can't let her walk out of here." But Aria no longer felt fear, not of him, not of the Dominion, not her past, and she slowly rose to her feet, meeting the commander's visor with a calm that made him step back involuntarily. "Shoot me," she said, her voice steady, echoing strangely in the damaged chamber, "and you'll trigger the next war. Let me leave, and I'll finish the one that already started." The commander hesitated, finger tightening on the trigger, but the surviving counselor stepped forward in a trembling cluster, shouting that she was under council protection, and Aria almost laughed at the irony. These same people had condemned Earth for defiance, yet now they shielded the one human they understood the least. Dominion shrieks echoed faintly in the distant corridors. More were coming. Many more. Aria looked at her father, then at the humans, then at the terrified counselors, and she understood with a kind of brutal clarity that none of them knew the full story. Only her mother had known. Her mother, whose research had rewritten Aria's genome and awakened something older than the Dominion themselves. Something the galaxy had feared for centuries. Humanity without limits. She exhaled once deeply and said, "All you want me for different reasons. But I'm not your weapon. I'm not your experiment. I'm not your symbol." She stepped toward the shattered exit, her posture steady despite the tremors running through the floor as the next Dominion wave approached. "I'm going to end this war on my terms." No one tried to stop her. Not the commander. Not the counselors. Not even the man who claimed to be her father. They simply watched as Aria walked out of the chamber and into the smoking corridors beyond, the distant thunder of Dominion forces echoing like a storm ahead of her. For the first time in her life, she did not feel hunted. She felt inevitable. And every species in the galaxy was about to learn what that meant.